Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So in this video I'm going to explain why it's probable that Russia shall resort to using weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine. Because the war's obviously going badly for Russia. Well, Russia's still probably going to win, somewhat depending on your definition of win, because it was widely predicted by Western pundits that Ukraine would fall within 4 days. And Putin was so cocksure, that's why his troops were inadequately furnished with ammunition and food. It was supposed to be really just a victory parade from the Belarusian border down to Kiev. You could drive it in an hour and see how they stalled. In an audacious move, they attempted to seize that Antonov airfield just outside Kiev. I think it was worth attempting from the Russian point of view. Even though they didn't achieve it, their losses weren't very heavy. And if they had accomplished that, that would have been a real game changer. But anyway, that's what they're crawling there. And the so-called convoy is like the world's biggest traffic jam, a 40-mile set of military vehicles just north of Kiev. So Putin's dismissed 8 generals because he's furious with them going at a snail's pace towards Kiev. So they're increasingly frustrated. And as his conventional forces have so underperformed, it makes it even more likely that he'll resort to weapons of mass destruction. Now, the Russians are getting their alibis in now. For the past week or so, they said that the Americans have been helping the Ukrainians develop biological weapons, chemical weapons, and so on, despite the United States being a signatory of various conventions that they would never use this, and no one's accused the Americans of ever using chemical weapons or biological weapons. Not since, I think, the First World War, when they might have used some poison gas, but not for over 100 years. Now, there are nuclear weapons. Yes, the United States possesses nuclear weapons, but Ukraine does not. It handed them all over to Russia in 1994, pursuant to the Budapest Memorandum, in which, of course, you'll remember Russia vowed to never violate Ukraine's neutrality or Ukraine's independence and territorial integrity. There's nothing about neutrality in that, despite Russia saying, well, you promised not to move NATO 1 inch to the east. That's not in any treaty whatsoever. Ukraine has the absolute right to form an alliance with any other country it wishes to, and you can see why they desperately want to be part of NATO, because Russia is killing so many Ukrainians. That's why they really need a military alliance. So anyway, Maria Zakharova, one of the most notorious woman to lie in Russia, is saying, oh, the Ukrainians have got these things. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, they brought this one out. So that when Russia carries out a chemical weapons attack, a biological attack with anthrax, that's the one they've mentioned, or indeed a tactical nuclear strike, they will say, oh, the Ukrainians did this. They killed their own soldiers. They killed their own civilians, or it was a leak from them. And Russia has deployed this tactic many times in Syria because they've carried out numerous chemical weapons attacks in Syria, deliberately gassing thousands of civilians. Now, why are these weapons forbidden? Because they kill just so many people. They're so indiscriminate. The point is, with a gun, ideally, you shoot the person you want to kill, that person's dead, but it doesn't harm anybody else. But because gas disperses, it kills many, many people, not just the enemy fighter. It's going to kill all sorts of civilians. Or thermobaric bombs are not forbidden, but they have to be used very sparingly to make sure you're killing enemy combatants and not just civilians who happen to be in the area. This is what's going to happen. So Putin, he put his nuclear forces on high alert, and a few days into the war, that's partly a warning to Western countries that if you're too helpful to the Ukraine in defending their sovereign soil, that maybe we'll nuke you. So there's a theory this is escalate to de-escalate, that he's, by really raising the risks, he's going to frighten the Western countries off helping Ukraine too much. And that's already paying dividends for him. The Poles, they offered to give their MiG-29s, these fighter jets that the Ukrainians had trade on. They would hand them over to the United States, who then hand them on to the Ukrainians. And then the Poles would be given American fighter jets of similar capabilities for free to replace these MiGs they handed on. But the United States is unwilling to expedite that, which I think is wrong of them to refuse this. They say, well, that's too provocative of Russia. Well, look how provocative Russia is. So Lavrov says that the EU is violating its own principles by giving the Ukrainians weapons. No, it's not. I mean, all EU countries have armies, and they sell weapons to other countries, and they provide weapons to other countries for free. So there's nothing against EU principles about doing that, about helping a democracy defend itself against tyranny. And the EU has taken military action in Libya. Maybe it's the wrong thing to do, but it wasn't against EU principles. EU states have fought wars since the foundation of the European Union. So it's not a violation of EU principles at all. Anyway, so if Kiev doesn't fall imminently, then Putin might resort to this. But just today, the UK Armed Forces Minister said that if Russia did that, there'll be some international response. Now, Putin might think, they've set these red lines before, Westerners. Barack Obama did in Syria with regards to chemical weapons. He crossed that line, Putin, and then no serious action was taken. There have been numerous chemical gas attacks in Syria. And then actually, Trump is one of the few who did take firm action. He, the French and the British, they bombed Syrian military positions to penalize the Assad regime for a chemical weapons attack. So anyway, this is a blatant ploy. However, this dastardly trick which Moscow is attempting might just be foiled by what's happening. By pre-bunking the lies that Moscow is telling, they might not go ahead with the attack. Remember, the United States and the UK, they revealed this Russian plot to create a false flag incident in February this year, either to pretend to kill civilians in Ukraine or actually kill civilians in Ukraine who are of the Russian ethnicity, to then pin that on the Ukrainians to try and create a pretext for this invasion, thinking that would be justificatory of an invasion supposedly to prevent genocide that Putin kept coming up with and are not substantiating at all. But obviously, as he's been doing that, because he's been committing these war crimes every day, deliberately bombing a maternity hospital in Mariupol just the other day. So the United Nations has confirmed over 600 Ukrainian civilians have been killed in this war, and the United Nations says that's probably far behind the actual number because they have to confirm first of all that this person really existed and just wasn't made up by propaganda. This person really is dead. This person died due to the war and indeed was a civilian, not a combatant. I mean, I know that civilians are always killed in war, but the Russian military is particularly indiscriminate. They accuse the Ukrainians of using human shields as though that would actually stop Russia killing people. It would be completely ineffectual. So it's all very sad. It's all very avoidable. But I mean, Putin is surrounded by people like him who are known for their merciless barbarism. So he must be deeply frustrated that the war is going badly for him. So he's got about 200,000 troops in Ukraine. Now, the Russian military, they mobilize all reserves as 3.5 million, but they can't deploy all those. They can't even supply 200,000. How are they going to deploy 3.5 million? They have to guard some other areas of Russia, other borders. And there's another thing. This shows what a blatant, barefaced liar Putin is. He said that no conscripts were in Ukraine, despite the fact that Russian conscripts had been captured and had revealed all under questioning, and which Moscow hasn't even disputed. 2 days later, he said that the Russian conscripts were fighting in Ukraine. So that was a flagrant lie. Or was he lying the second time and not the first? And he's assured the Russian public that no reservists will ever be called up. Now, why does he feel impelled to give that assurance? Because he knows the war is going so badly for him that he will be soon compelled to call up reservists, which will be unpopular. It's already an unpopular war. 14,000 gallant Russians already arrested for protesting against this illegal war of aggression. They want peace. They don't want their own people killed. They don't want Ukrainians killed. And it was also cratering the economy. But the longer the war drags on, the more and more people are going to protest. I mean, I hold my manhood cheap. I wouldn't have the gallantry to protest a $300 fine. I mean, that's your month's salary for the average Russian. That's for the first offence, some time in jail for subsequent offences. And he's having to be more oppressive than ever. The whole foreign agent law has been broadened. So anyone who's got any links to a foreign agent is going to be on the foreign agent list. A friend, a relative, anyone who did business with a foreign agent. Most of these media outlets, if they accepted any funding from a foreign country, if they're any human rights organization, they're all labeled foreign agents to try and delegitimize them, to try and divert attention from Putin's appalling crimes against humanity in his own country and abroad. So it's very dispiriting. It's all projection, calling the West an empire of lies. Not that nobody in the West lies, of course, but really Putin takes the biscuit. And when it comes to people pointing out that this is against all international law, invading Ukraine, they'll say, yes, but he'll come up with a tu quoque argument. Well, what about Iraq, which is a completely different situation, liberating people from a genocidal tyrant who was very friendly with Russia and the Soviet Union, by the way, who provided him with most of his weaponry, despite him having killed thousands of Iraqi communists. and obviously to overthrowing him to try and make sure he didn't have weapons of mass destruction, doing so pursuant to lots of United Nations Security Council resolutions. But I know the argument was debatable because the last one said there'll be serious consequences if you do not fully and immediately cooperate with the weapons inspectors. Bearing in mind that there were already no-fly zones in the north and south of Iraq, there were already severe sanctions in Iraq, and there were air raids almost every day, the only thing more serious than that was going to be a ground invasion, which indeed happened. All right, so that's it. It's very depressing. Russia's not offering any concessions whatsoever. The talks in Antalya, Turkey today failed, which were midwifed by the Turks, and Russia not willing to offer any concessions. They wanting to completely demilitarize Ukraine, have it never be part of NATO or the EU, and the Russians aren't willing to give back any soil. I hope it doesn't resort to using chemical weapons as well, but, you know, having made the threat, that the West has got to fulfill it. I mean, and providing more weapons is not enough. There might have to be limited military action saying, we're going to take out some of your military forces in Ukraine, not elsewhere. Putin will then raise the spectre of nuclear war. I mean, I wonder, do we have to stand up to that? Or maybe I'm wrong. Because the entire population of Ukraine being killed is not as bad as the entire human race being wiped out. But if we don't take a stand, then where? Where's next? Moldova? In a briefing Lukashenko gave, there was a map of and showed arrows down to Moldova because that's the next step. This is preparatory to invading more and more countries. And he's going to think that NATO's completely limp-wristed because it's so weak-willed. He can invade another country and, the NATO will never, his words never mean what they say, will never stand up. So anyway, and I don't see Putin being taken out. He's surrounded by people who are fanatically loyal. He values loyalty over competence, which is why they're so grossly incompetent, which is why it's screwed up so badly in Ukraine. And his defense minister hasn't carried the can for it, Sergei Shoigu, and his top general, Valery Gerasimov, he's not been dismissed because in a completely irresponsible way, they'll pass blame down the chain of command. They never carry the can for it themselves, the people at the top, those who really screw up. There's a complete lack of accountability and does refer to accounts as well, which is why so much public money is stolen. Supposedly quite a lot of fuel in the Russian army was sold because the soldiers just want more money. But pretty soon, people aren't going to be paid on time. There could be mass disorder. There's going to be higher unemployment. There's going to be real hardship. Food prices shooting up as it is. There's going to be inflation. Well, there's serious inflation already. Might be hyperinflation. But he doesn't care about ordinary people whatsoever. But it could lead to the sort of mass unrest they saw in Kazakhstan in January this year. And Putin, he thinks the Tiananmen Square option is right. What you do is you just shoot dead thousands of unarmed demonstrators. And that's the way to stay in power. He thinks Germany should have done that when he was there in Dresden in 1989. That's enough for me. Thank you for following the channel. So, Slava Ukraina.